Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MS Pearce. It's a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 11th of June 2023. Sorry it's a bit later. It's going to be very difficult for me to get these done as timely as I'd like because there is so much going on, and I'm trying to not only look at different sources to get an idea of the activity, but then look at different mappers, and I'm having to adapt my maps in many. It's not just Bakhmut and maybe a little bit up here in Maziativka or something like that. It is a load of places along the front line, and I'm trying really hard to get my mapping resembling something coherent. Anyway, let's get to the front line. We're going to go to the ISW to talk about just what might be going on in the northeastern sector from Kupiansk down to Zaporizhzhia to Kreminna. Again, slightly changed map from War Mapper again here. That's on my map looking like this. Zaporizhzhia is here. Kupiansk is up here. So this is a northern part of the northeast sector. And the ISW has to say about that. Russian forces made marginal advances northeast of Kupiansk on June the 10th. Geolocated footage published on June the 10th yesterday indicates that Russian forces made marginal advances northeast of Velyka. Let's see what that refers to. So just to let you know that Velyka is here, and we did have a moment where the Ukrainians pushed them back. I don't know, probably a month or so ago now. So this is where a Russian tank is. No. Sorry. A Russian tank gets hit by a loitering drone, and then after that, the tank crew get out and they survive, and then they're standing around by the tank, which is pretty dodgy because it's like on fire. I think they actually walk away and then come back when it's not on fire, and then they get hit with an IED dropped from a drone, and I presume that takes out the crew. So where did that happen? That's been geolocated to here, which is at this point. We'll whack that into our Google Maps and see that Russian tank is all the way back there. So again, I don't quite understand what ISW mean when they talk about Russian forces made marginal advances northwest of Velyka. To me, that is well behind their lines. To have a tank being taken out here is no advance at all. So I do keep pointing this out. I don't know what they mean by advance, as in what map they are referring to, and whether that's an advance from where they were, I don't know, arbitrarily 2 months ago or something like that. But actually, Russians have had control of that area for goodness knows how long. I mean, that would not indicate advance at all. So it's just a little bit bizarre. And there are repelled attacks. So Russian forces apparently suppressed 4 Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in Novominsk, well, that's north of Sinkivka itself, Orlyanka, and Stelmakivka. So that is to say, sorry, I keep going to the wrong map. That is to say, up sort of in this area, Sinkivka is there, and then moving down to Orlyansky, that's there, and then further down to Stelmakivka, that's there. Now, on top of that, there are some pretty cryptic things coming out. So, no reports reported last night. The Russian channels are worried about troop movements in the Kharkiv region near Kupiansk. So, Ukrainians could be. The night is dark and full of terror. We know that they have an advantage with being able to fight at night. So that is something to take into account. And there have been another couple of cryptic reports of Ukrainians being active, maybe along the entire that northeast sector to some degree. So I don't know. I was talking about how that's been really quiet up and down here because all the activity has been in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, with some obviously in Bakhmut and Avdiivka and Marinka, the usual sort of places there. Maybe a bit in Bilohorivka, there's quite a bit of fighting there. But it's been relatively quiet, and you're thinking, right, there's a big counteroffensive going on right now. Where's the decoy going to happen? Where's a feint going to happen? Or where's a surprise going to take place? All of these kind of things to consider, all of these variables, and I'm just not sure. And then no report sort of says something like that. And you look at Poulet-Vallon's map, and actually they have Ukrainians active north of Kreminna now, so that's going to be towards Chervonopipivka, and then in the forest area as well. So I've not heard too much report about this, but if that is what Poulet-Volon is saying, then there will be some reports somewhere concerning that, with the Russians pressuring in Bilohorivka, as we have heard over recent days. It goes on to say, a Russian mill blogger claimed that combat engagements continue near Bilohorivka, and they've repelled a small Ukrainian mechanized group attempting to break through Russian defenses in the area. So that's something different. We haven't heard of too much mechanized equipment used in the Bilohorivka area. Other than that, it's down to Bakhmut. So if we come to Bakhmut, we'll we'll have a look at a number of different sources. The Bakhmut map, as far as Poulet-Volon's concerned, looks like this. So Ukrainian pressure from the north, also in the Yahidny Berkivka area, and then in the Klishchivka area. But actually, Russian pressure, in response to that, in a number of areas as well. Okay, let's go and see what the ISW has to say. Russian and Ukrainian forces both continued ground attacks, of both of them attacking in the Bakhmut area yesterday. Ukrainian forces spokesperson Cherevati stated that Ukrainian forces advanced up to 1,400 meters in different unspecified areas of the Bakhmut front. That kind of thing prompts Philip O'Brien here to say, so Ukrainian forces around Bakhmut have advanced almost a mile in 24 hours. It took the Russians almost a year to advance from Popasna to the edge of Bakhmut, which is about 20 miles. So the Ukrainians are doing a pretty good job of taking back territory that the Russians agonized over taking for an awful long time, as he said, just to put it into perspective. Okay, so that's the map as far as Poulet-Volon's concerned. But when you look at what No Report says, and you look at where the Russian lines are here, you don't have these sort of twin spikes at the top there. It's more all across here and much more favorable for the Ukrainians around Dubovo-Vasilivka. He says Orikovo-Vasilivka is cleared. Let's go back and look on my map. Then down, we're going to go down to Bakhmut, past Kreminna and whatnot, and here. So remember, I've got three mapping lines here. These are all Russian defensive lines. The red line is Suryak Maps, pro-Russian mapper. Interesting fun fact here, Suryak Maps hasn't done any mapping updates since the 9th of June. So they're 2 days of not mapping. Is that because the Russians are under the Kosh in Zaporizhzhia? I don't know. Sometimes it feels like there's a lot of fair weather mapping. Pro-Ukrainian deep state map has an unchanged line, a yellow line, of Russian defense, and pro-Ukrainian mapper Andrew Pepecha has a blue line of Russian defense around here. And all of them seem to agree that the Russians are still present each side of the E40, the M03 highway going out there, and that there's quite a lot of area around here. Well, no reports are saying more likely looks a bit like this, and not so much around there, and probably a bit like that. Okay, so you can see that there's a bit of a difference there. I hope that broadly looks, a little bit like what you said. So the fate of Dubovo-Vasilivka is not yet known, but I received preliminary first info about it and needs confirmation. In other words, they might have been pushed out of there. You would expect that. There's been claims previously that actually the Ukrainians, remember this reservoir here doesn't have any water, and the Ukrainians have been pressuring Bakivka from the west as well. And that could be from crossing here, the reservoir, and attacking from the west. There is a chance that Dubovo-Vasilivka could get cut off, certainly troops in this kind of area there, as this salient gets larger in the Bakivka area, and the Ukrainians put pressure from the north as well. As you can see from Poulet-Volon's map, there's pressure from north at Zalizniansky, but I would expect there to be pressure here as well. Anyway, to go back to No Reports, Russian sources confirm that Ukrainians have reached Yahidne and are probing the defense there. So that is gains for the Ukrainians in that area. Back on my map, this is here. And this is important because if they can take Yahidne, then they cut off that northern supply route into Bakhmut. Exactly the same sort of things as we were talking about with the Russians taking Ukrainian positions in the Russian advance that have eventually meant that Bakhmut was pretty much taken. Well, actually, all those things are going to be relevant for the Ukrainians taking this land back. So they would want to cut off main supply routes into Bakhmut. So that is that. There is some footage coming out. There's quite a lot of talk about Bilohora, so offensive actions in the 2nd Assault Battalion from the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade. 2 Russians, ammo, RPG, and a machine gun were destroyed. The Bakhmut front moves further, and I don't know if that's the same as this footage. it's difficult to know. Sometimes it's just generally from Bakhmut. You're trying to work out where it is. There's certainly some footage around Bilahora. Two bits of big bits of footage here that has been geolocated. We'll find that now. So this is Ukrainians in this area fighting. So just to let you know, Bilahora is further down here. There, so it's going to be around when it says, Bilahora, the fighting is more likely going to be around the canal area. Let's see where those Ukrainian troops are fighting. Yeah, so this probably refers to when they took this back from the Russians over the last few days. I don't know if you remember, there was fighting around these sort of pylon bits here, and the Ukrainians took these. Yeah, it is here. Yes. So these tree lines and trench lines here, they've taken them back over the last 24 to 48 hours. So the fact that you're now seeing footage coming from geolocated from there is evidence that has taken place, and that all the mappers now agree that this area is now cleared and under Ukrainian control. But if we go back to ISW, basically, quite a lot of it is talking about unspecified gains, and the claims from the Ukrainians, like, we've made X hundred meters, 1,000 meters, whatever, but you're not quite sure exactly where that is. I'm fairly sure that the mapping I'm showing you now is somewhat out of date already. But yeah, so they're repelling the Russian MOD claim that troops of the southern grouping of forces are repelling Ukrainian attacks southwest and northwest of Bakhmut, and Ukrainian general staff reporting Russian forces conducted unsuccessful operations near Adiivka and Bilahora. So that is Bilahora there. So it could be the Russians are pushing back there, they've lost that tree line. As you can see here, that is what this Poulet-Valon's arrow here is probably referring to. So the loss of tree lines there. As you can see, that is this red area now indicated in that hashing that the Ukrainians have taken back, and the Russians are apparently possibly counterattacking there. So that footage here is more likely referring to a counterattack than Ukrainians taking that land in the first place, if that has only just come out. Anyway, that's what's going on in Bakhmut. So you can see that it is very similar to the last couple of days. Incremental gains, just not sure exactly where. Some of the mappers aren't. I think there's operational security around Bakhmut as well, which means that getting details of the gains here is equally difficult. But although Deep State Map hasn't changed the mapping around here, particularly in a number of days, along the whole front line for a couple of days, it did do some significant changes last night, and we'll come to that in a second. So as we come down to Avdiivka, past Klishchivka, Ozaryanivka, Kurdyamivka and whatnot, I haven't heard of any activity around the Myolsk area, but I think there's been quite a bit of activity there over the last week. And nothing really to report about Avdiivka, really quite quiet. The mapping remains pretty much the same as activity around Pervomaisky, and Severny and Opitny, but no different from the last few days. So Opitny there, Pervomaisky, Novelsky. Now, the mapping in this general area again refers to the three colors are the Russian lines in this area. Otherwise, blue. Well, I'm in the process of changing my entire mapping so that what I'm doing up in Bakhmut will be broadly the same along the rest of the map. So the blue line refers to Andrew Perpetua's Russian lines from Marinka down across for the whole of the Zaporizhzhia front line, and the red line refers to Suryat maps. And actually, what you can see is quite a big difference there in where the Russians are defending between the two mappers. Now, bear in mind that pro-Russian mapper Suryat Maps has not updated for 2 days. Nonetheless, they disagree quite a lot, and this won't be as a result of activity in the last 2 days, but they disagree quite a bit on where the Russians are in this southern corner of the Donetsk front line. Right, okay, let's go on to talk about what is going on along this southern Donetsk into Zaporizhzhia front line. You can see the Zaporizhzhia border comes down here after Velyka Novosilka. So this is still in the Donetsk region here. I haven't heard of any activity around Vuhledar, Pavlivka. There was activity around Volodymyrivka a week or so ago, but not heard anything since then. Let's go down to see what the ISW has to say, and actually an awful lot. So how do I concisely summarize all of this? Well, let's go to some other sources to see what is going on. We'll go first to Poulet Volant. It has a nice kind of overview set of maps. We'll go, where should we go to first? Yeah, Velyka Novosilka. So this is where a lot of the activity is taking place. As you can see, a number of different places where the Ukrainians are attacking. Just to remind you that down here, this is low ground. You can see from the contours there and the fact there's a river there. This is low ground. There's higher ground here and there's higher ground here. I think Ukrainians are trying to use the high ground to their advantage, to take the high ground rather than the towns, and then the towns will fall. In fact, there are some claims that Blahadatny is now fallen without a gunshot being fired, and that's kind of what you want, really. You don't want to endanger your troops. You want to take territory back. You want the opposition to rout, take some prisoners, take some equipment, and that's kind of the easiest way of taking territory, right? Okay, so before I go on, I did share this with you in the news piece this morning, but I think it's vitally important to understand this front line. It looks, and this is not to counteract operational security, this is all out there. It looks overall like Russian troops, from reports and the videos, are starting to break and run without artillery or armor support, facing Ukrainian troops that want payback. Sorry, I didn't start at the beginning. Silly me. Just got off the phone and two trusted former intelligence people. Some of the takeaways we got that we can openly talk about is that, as predicted, Ukraine is not pushing for a single deep thrust as much as a thrust along the entire line. There are 3 to 4 thrusts and more probably coming. This will force Russians to use up or shift forces to block all the thrusts, with Ukraine probably to launch more than 25 major thrusts in the next few days. It's a lot of thrusts. He likes thrusting. This will force Russians to block every one, or they may have a breakthrough. Every time Russia blocks a thrust, they have to bring reserve forces out of hiding or from the deep retreat or deep reserves and bring them in range of Ukrainian 155 guns and HIMARS. Once the reserve forces are used and no more mobile blocking forces are left, then the real fun should start. Okay, before I go on, let's put that into context. So what you have is all of these attacks taking place in a number of places along the front line, but actually not crazy amount of places. They aren't attacking everywhere across all front lines, just maybe 4 or 5 sort of smaller places here, a few places here, a few places here, a few places there. Okay, then the Russians are panicking, sending in reserves, and that fixes troops and then leaves weaknesses elsewhere, arguably, and that attrits those reserves. They either rout or they're attrited by artillery fire, and he's going to talk in a second about how the artillery fire is to the advantage of the Ukrainians. And then once they've been used up, you can have larger attacks where there will be no reserve forces able to be brought to bear by the Russians, and you can imagine that the Ukrainians would then take huge amounts of land and cause more routing. You know, if in these smaller attacks that's happening to some degree with the Russians, and we've seen some video evidence, 2 pieces of video evidence of Russians running away en masse, then that is, you know, it's a really plausible explanation. So then the real fun should start. He says, also, the Russians will have to use every bit of its artillery. This means that Russian and Ukrainian artillery will be going at each other in the open. And Russian guns that are shot out with less accuracy, less range, and less mobility will probably pay a heavy price. Now, we know that the Ukrainians have things like Caesar, Panzerhaubitze 2000s, Crabs, pieces of equipment that have greater range than the Russian equivalents. And they're also in better nick and newer. The Russian barrels are going to be shot. We know they've had problems with getting hold of barrels. They've gone to Iran to get barrels, so on and so forth. So Ukraine still has the ability for at least 2 brigade-sized water crossings and a brigade-sized air assault with about 100 helicopters with supporting artillery to tie down more units. It looks overall like Russian troops, from reports and video, are starting to break and run without artillery or armor support facing Ukrainian troops that want payback. I can't see Russian troops standing their ground. Once panic starts, it's going to be Crimea 500, in my opinion. And yes, there will be Ukrainian losses, but Ukraine will be able to save most of its troops, reform, and refight, while Russian troops are far more likely to not survive in older Soviet vehicles. Again, nothing upset related. Have faith. It looks like there is a plan, and from reports, it's working. The Russians can only keep showing the Bradley pile for so long. Sooner or later, they will run out of everything. So that's a really positive look. Malia, the deputy defense minister, says that we read the latest reports from the battlefield. The mood is good. Everything will be Ukraine, with Serhiy Olenyk, deputy commander of the glorious 35th Marine Brigade, which is now heroically fighting in the east. She obviously likes him. Then there's talk here from no reports. And War Gonzo, which is a pro-Russian source, verifying this. Based on my latest information, the Ukrainians hold both Neskutchnya and Novodonetsk. Storozheve and Blahodatna are contested. Actually, Blahodatna is no longer contested. It's in Ukrainian hands. Ukrainians face stiff resistance directly west of Storozheve. Okay, let's go into that area and see what we can make out. So as you can see, the Surat Maps hasn't updated the mapping. There's some considerable mapping changes if you look at what Andrew Perpetua is saying. And actually in this area, that is also what Deep State Maps is now saying of this particular area. So coming down here, Neskutchin is now apparently under Ukrainian control, and Blahodatne, without firing a shot, according to one source or some sources, that's the case there. And Storozheve, in fact, I was reporting for Ukraine, I think said that. Storozheve here, there's tough fighting for that settlement. That is what's that. So those are the kind of place names, just to give you an idea, and that's what No Reports is saying as well. Ukrainians taking that area to the east, and indeed, it looks like quite a large area that Ukrainians have taken. This itself may be, I don't know, is it? It's not too out of date. This is from last night, but we know that Ukrainians are using night vision, thermal optics to do some of their attacks because they know they have the advantage over the Russians in that way, and so that could be you could see a lot of engagements take place and territory gain for the Ukrainians at night, and therefore mapping updates is just a continual process. It's not like daytime fighting, right, now we can work out what's happened. It's just continual. Since both sides, says Tendar, are already reporting it, I will release the information I've collected too. There's anyway a delay of this information, therefore does not compromise OPSEC. So you can imagine this is probably a good day late anyway, what I'm going to say. Almost the entire forward defense line of the Russian army near Velyka Novosilka, around 20 kilometers long, has been wiped out. Ukrainian forces liberated Neskutchnya and Novodonetsk. Based on Russian drone footage, we know that Ukrainian forces are already operating further south, hammering Russian forces in Storozheve and the little village of Blahodatne nearby, which now has already been taken. And that looks like these sort of places. So these have now been taken, and the line is down here. Storozheve could, well, he's saying 3 villages taken now, so it could be that Storozheve has now been lost to the Ukrainians or gained by the Ukrainians, and that line is further to the south. So it could be that the fighting is over Makarivka now, and the line comes across here. As I say, it's all ongoing continually. So then a map change for Tendar as well. These things are quick. And indeed, so Ukrainian forces have liberated a village of Blahodatne, and there's geolocated visual confirmation of that taking place. And then we have Russians also admitting a lot of this. So, quote, it's clear that after Neskutchina, the enemy moves on. So these are Ukrainians moving on, and our units, the Russians, with a lack of forces, could go lower to a more fortified defense line due to flank attacks by enemy units. From the field, they report that reinforcements are needed to level the situation. So that is, and I don't know if you can kind of see that map, but that is to say that they have lost Neskutchina and these areas to the top as well. Rybar also admits this. Rybar reports major Ukrainian advances in the Velyka Novosilka area, with Ukrainian forces capturing Neskutchina and Blahodatne almost without a fight and moving on to Urezhane and Novodonetsk. So that is to say that, that all of that I just said is also confirmed by pro-Russian sources. And we've got some, goodness me, my computer is struggling. So Control 0, come on, let's get it sorted. Right, there's also Ukrainian audio transcripts that have come out, or transcripts of audio taken, that's basically saying, "Oh my goodness, we're doing really well." So, guys, holy shysters! One of the most successful days in the whole war. So many good news, so much good news. My guys had the most successful assault in their whole life. F the whole windbreak, killed many, got trophies, and had only 3 lightly wounded. Cyborgs, C words were fleeing. Guys got equipment and guns. Damn. Just know that the guys were shot. Couldn't imagine something like that. They were just fleeing. They were afraid to fight. Maybe it's that unit, or maybe they're all like that. So certainly, and at least some places, it's looking good for them. There is some footage coming out from Ukrainians, but not lots, because of the operational security. And that might skew to pro-Russian, because the Russians will release every good bit of footage they can find that shows Ukrainians getting hammered. We'll come on to that in a second. Anyway, here's an example of combined arms initiative. Drones spotting for 3 vehicles, 2 Humvees with guns on, and another Humvee. The other one without guns skedaddles. The other 2 support these guys. They come in, take the trench, so on and so forth. It's sort of textbook stuff, you would think. So that kind of stuff is happening. And then we go on further to the west. So there's a lot of activity around there, and that will continue. Then, as you can see, the mappers generally agree until we get to around, this is south of Malotokmachka. So there's been activity there around Novopokrovka. So Ukrainians have made some gains there. If we go back to Poulet-Volon's map, we can see, if we come to the west, that's the south of Heliopole, although no yellow arrows, some activity there, and then coming on towards I think this is probably Malotokmachka. So around there, there's pressure to the south. So that's around here, indicated by Poulet-Volon. Some gains south of Heliopole. Haven't heard too much. That's around Drozhnyanka. A little bit of mapping changes to the west of Drozhnyanka. And then we come past Malotokmachka, so that there's activity there. And then around Nestoryanka, north of Myrna, there's 2 of them. And onto Lobkove, where there's been a lot of activity taking place there. And this is where we see some footage released by the Russians of Ukrainians getting a hit around Piatikatsky. Sorry. So activity taking place there. Let's go and have a little look at that. Okay, so this area, based on geolocations, Ukraine has liberated the settlement of Lobkove. So that was pretty much confirmed yesterday, actually yesterday early afternoon. So since then, they could have made some further gains. Now, footage from an attempted Ukrainian breakthrough earlier today near the town of Piatikatsky in the western Zaporizhzhia region. According to the Wolgonzo, so that's a pro-Russian source, the advance was crushed, with multiple Ukrainian IFVs and tanks being destroyed and abandoned. And the reason for this being the settlement and surrounding fields occupying a regional lowland with Russian artillery and armor positioned on the high ground to the south, making it extremely difficult for any kind of Ukrainian advance. Now, I've watched this footage, and the Ukrainians are getting peppered, and there's a lot of artillery. It's trying to work out whether artillery is actually hitting vehicles or whether it's hitting dusty fields, and what's going on. And the vehicles are still moving. There aren't that many vehicles getting hit. I can't really tell from this footage that what Wolgonzo is claiming is actually happening. You can see some people moving, you can see vehicles moving, uh, and yeah, vehicles again. I don't know that this, and I don't want to be super positive just because something's burning there for sure, right? So it looks like vehicles might well have been hit. Again, it's what you're going to expect. So there's grey smoke there. Whether it's complete crushing, you've still got troops behind an infantry fighting vehicle or APC. They're doing their sort of maneuvers. So I don't know. Is the answer to that? If that's the best video to support the Ukrainians being crushed, then I would say that Russians are over egging it, and we only have that big piece of footage of the equipment I've talked about already that's being recycled by the Russians all the time. So if they are struggling to get really good footage of Ukrainians being taken out in meaningful numbers, then I think that's a good sign for the Ukrainians. If this is their second best bit of footage, then uh, I don't think it's too bad. I mean, that looks like the Ukrainians are going to lose stuff. They're going to have vehicles blown up. Of course they are. So you would expect footage like that, but they still seem to be moving. They don't seem to be crushed. Another bit of footage that come out is this of. So this is Ukrainian footage of in actually. So where was it? It was. I think this took place, as far as I remember. This convoy was somewhere down here, somewhere possibly in this area, on the way to support the Russians on the front line, I think, but I might be wrong. Anyway, this is an entire convoy of Russian kit that was peppered with Ukrainian munitions. I'm not sure what with though, because it's quite a long way away. So I don't know if this is artillery or whether they're using HIMARS or something. I don't know. But anyway, some of this kit is taken out. Not all of it. I wondered when I talked about this in the news piece, wonder why there's no humans around here that I can see in this footage. So where are they? What have they just parked this stuff up and gone and camped somewhere else? Maybe in this building up there? And this was hit early morning, or are they in their vehicles but not moving? Why aren't they driving away? So I don't know. It's who knows. You don't see too many bits of kit taken out. It depends whether this drone was then suddenly, I don't know, shot down, electronic warfare, whatever. There could be more kit being destroyed, or it could just be a few pieces of that. But I would imagine if the Ukrainians were onto there being a convoy just sitting ducks like that, they would put everything into taking that out. But anyway, that's just another bit of footage. So you get the idea of the activity that is taking place along the front line. So that was all referring to, or not that last bit, but the stuff before, attacks towards or past Lobkove towards Pietkachki. I don't know whether that is now under Ukrainian control for sure. If we go to my map, Andrew Perpetua does have that under Ukrainian. Well, sorry, no, Andrew Perpetua has that not under Russian control. So this is his Russian control line. That the grey zone is going to be an almost unknowable distance between until between the Russian line and somewhere else. It's just until you get geolocated evidence such as what we've seen from Blagodatny, it's hard to know whether Ukrainians have control over any given settlement. What we can be more certain of is where the Russians have been pushed back to, and where their lines are, as according to the mappers who have their sources on the ground and are able to find these things out better than I can. I'm just sort of assimilating all of this, aggregating all of this, hopefully for your benefit. Anyway, that's what's going on along the front line. It will be super dynamic. Things will change. There will be footage coming out from both sides that will try and skew the narrative either way. Although I say that, not much footage does come out from the Ukrainians because they seem to want to keep it really safe until things are definitely certain. So, for example, there's some imagery coming out from Blagodatny that doesn't challenge their security of their operations going on around there. There's enough people know about this now. There's enough people know that Ukrainians are attacking around here and the activity is there. So that kind of footage seems to be able to come out okay. But otherwise, generally, things getting blown up is more often coming from the Russians, and that is because they want you to know about it. What they probably don't want you to know about is all the other places where the Ukrainians are attacking. So that is one bit of footage from, I don't know, 20 places they're attacking, then what's going on in the other 19 places. And there you go. I think that's the important thing to remember. Anyway, thank you. Hopefully that was useful. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.